My name's Todd Miranda, and in this video I'll show you how to add interactivity to your controls using triggers in control templates. Let's begin by creating a WPF Windows application project. And we'll name it. Alright. Now we can obviously change the look of any control, and we can change it to anything we want using control templates. But oftentimes, especially in a line of business type application, you really don't want to go that far to the flashy animation kind of crazy side of the house. You really just kind of want to add just that extra little bit to the general controls that are provided for you. So we'll take a look at that by just using a button. We're just going to create a button, and we're going to specify that it has a width of 150 pixels, and we'll specify that it has a height of 30 pixels, and then we'll specify that it has content of maybe click me, and we'll do that. And then we're going to come up here and we're going to create a window.resources section. And we're going to create a control template. Now oftentimes when you're creating control templates and you want to apply those to a particular control, you're going to do that through the use of a style. The reason why you would do that is in a style, the first thing you would do is have some setters, and those setters would set your default property values. That way if you use it and specify a particular property themselves, you would have a default. And then you would specify your control template as a part of your style, which would be the value of the template property of your style. But in this case, we're just going to create a control template and we'll attach that directly to our button. So since it's up in our resources section, we want to give it a key, and we'll call it my button template. And then we'll specify that its target type is of type button. Okay, so there's our control template, and then we're going to come down to our button, and we'll specify that it's going to use the template that is a static resource in this file. We use static resource because it's going to already exist and it's not going to be created dynamically when the application starts or when this page starts. It's located statically in this file right above, and it's already defined, so we'll call that a static resource. Alright, so let's begin to lay out our control template. Now first we need to define the look and feel of our control. So let's use a grid as the containing element. And the grid is really nice to use because it's easy to add multiple items together and position them kind of right on top of one another, really. We're going to specify a border element. And our border element is going to be the border for our button. And we'll give it a corner radius so that it's a little different than the default button of something maybe large like 10. That'll give it a really nice corner radius. And then we're going to specify the border brush, and we're going to just do some template binding on this. So we're going to template bind the border brush to the border brush property of our button. And then we'll also do the background, and we'll do some template binding on this as well. And we'll just bind this to its corresponding background property in the template. And then probably border thickness is the next thing. We've got border brush, background, and border thickness. Those are the three that we'll template bind. Now technically, if you're really wanting to implement this, you'd want to probably template bind some more. You'd probably want to template bind some more properties. But in our case, we'll just template bind those. That should be plenty for what we're going to do in our demo. So that gives us our border element. the next thing we want is obviously our content presenter, so that we can show our content from our button. Since we're creating our own control template, we have to provide the way for the content to be presented. So our content presenter control will come in here, and we will set the horizontal alignment of our content presenter, and we're going to template bind this as well. But the one thing that might not seem necessarily obvious here is we're going to template bind this to the horizontal content alignment of the button. Because technically when someone sets the horizontal content alignment in our button, we actually want to specify the alignment of the content. So that makes a little bit more sense. And we'll also specify the vertical alignment. And we'll do the same thing here. We'll specify this as being template bound to the vertical content alignment. And then another thing that we want to do is the margin. And since there's no margin on button, or in this particular case, what we really want, the margin of the content element will be the padding of the button. So if you can think about that, we're actually building the content element. If you look at the way that the content element fits inside the button, the margin of the content element would effectively be the padding of the button. So we'll template binding to the padding, and the reason we can do that is because they are of the same type. Okay, so there's our content presenter and our surrounding border. Alright, so that gets our general look and feel for our control. Now, since we didn't specify our control template as part of a style, which means we don't have any default styles, let's just come into our button and let's put, for now, let's specify a background of blue, a border brush of green, and a border thickness of 2. And then we'll run this. We'll do a build, and the build succeeded, and we'll run it to see what we've got so far. Okay, so we see that we've got our button, and obviously we don't have any interactive features, which is the purpose of this particular video. So we've styled the button, we've given it a new look and feel, but we get no interaction because we've completely overridden all of that. So let's go up into our control template, and let's add control template .triggers section. And this is where we're going to build the interactivity for our control template. So let's begin with a trigger. And this trigger will trigger off of the property is mouse over. And is mouse over true. And if is mouse over is equal to true, we will do a setter. And we'll specify a property of background, and we'll specify setter.value. This will be a linear gradient brush with a start point of 0, 0 and an end point of 0, 1. And we'll come in here, we'll put a gradient stop, and maybe this will be at 0, or maybe it'll be 0.3 so that we get a little bit more of this color. And its value, or its color, sorry, will be light gray. And then we'll have another gradient stop, and this one will go all the way to 1, and it'll be dark gray. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let's make that light blue and dark blue. Seems like things are always gray. Okay, and that gets our background. Now let's set our border brush. And our border brush, what we'll really do here is we'll reverse the gradient. So they kind of alternate. They'll kind of be reversed of one another. And we use the same colors. Now, one problem that you might see with this, if you start thinking about it, is we're going to set the background to these values. We set the border brush to these values. Background and border brush of what? Well, in a control template, we can use the same name type construct that we had used throughout the page, and by doing this, we don't necessarily get an opportunity to reference this in the code behind. Now, granted, we could get to it by delving down into the resources section and delving down into this control template. But really, when you use the name inside a control template, it's for the purposes of triggers. So we can come in here to this setter for this particular trigger, and we can say target name equals this border, and that tells our trigger what the target of the setter is. So in this particular case, we want to set the background and the border brush of the element named this border. Let's build. We'll run it. And now that you see that on mouse over, we get our nice gradient, so we get some indication of mouse over here. Doesn't look too terribly bad. Let's add one more interactive feature to this, just to make it somewhat complete. And we'll specify a trigger. The property of this will be is pressed. Value will be true again. That's what's great about using triggers here. You don't have to specify the untrigger. So you don't have to specify a value for isPressed equals false, because if isPressed is not true, it goes back to the previous state or the default state. Alright, let's create a setter here, and we'll set the property to... Actually, you know what we might do? We might just cheat, and we'll grab that, because what we're going to really set is the background and border brush again, except this time when it's pressed, we will use gray. So we'll switch to a gray look when our button's pressed, because it won't stay pressed in the press state for very long, typically. And we'll go ahead and go with that same scheme. Then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here to our button, and we're going to remove our defaults for background and border brush. We'll leave our border thickness to 2. And we'll build. Make sure we don't have any errors. And we'll run it. So there's our button. Here's our nice is mouse over state. And when we click on our button, we get our gray state with our slight gradient from light gray to dark gray. And you can see that now we've not only have we created our own look and feel for the button using a control template, but we've also gotten the same default behaviors by implementing triggers to provide the interactivity of our button. So now our button is much more usable. To the user, it's it's much more of a button as opposed to just a static type image. It actually has that interactivity and makes me feel like I can do things with that button. So it's a good usability feature. And you see that it's not too terribly difficult to do that using triggers in our control template. We could have put our control template in a style, but we just simply created the control template in our resources and referenced it as the template for the control that we wanted to modify. And that's it. Pretty simple to create the interactive features of a button or another control within a control template using triggers.